I am so excited to welcome everybody here today. My name is Mona Raglow. I'm the Director of Membership and Programming here at Central Exchange, and it just makes my heart so happy to see such a large group today. And I'm really excited to welcome you to part one of our Real Talk series. And the focus of these 4 programs is all about transgender and non-binary and the issues that they're facing and things that we as members of society, we want to be aware of. And I'm really excited and grateful to Katie Dixon. Katie is a longtime member of Central Exchange. She's she waved just a little bit. She's up in the upper left-hand corner of my screen. So Katie is going to be facilitating today. Like I said, she's been an active member of Central Exchange. She leads one of our exchange circles. And Katie, before you introduce the panelists, I'd love for you to explain and help us understand a little bit about your passion for this subject and how this series of panel discussions came to be.
Yeah, so I'm a mom, I'm an activist, I'm a queer person, I'm maybe a feminist, and probably a feminist. And I was frustrated to see a lot of different things, untruths being spoken just by people in general. And I think even well-meaning people on the internet, people in real life. And I got to thinking that I bet a lot of these people have never met a transgender non-binary person before. And then I thought, wait a second, they probably just don't know that they've met a transgender non-binary person before. And so I was going to just do like a Facebook Live with a couple of my friends. And I thought, why don't we turn it into something a little more formal and start this conversation. And today, I hope that you guys walk away from this with 3 outcomes. First, just be more comfortable in this conversation. Be more comfortable in how to talk about these issues and what words to use and what words not to use. Second, I hope that you walk away feeling like you are a better ally and you have the tools to be a better ally. And then the third thing, I have come to call all of these panelists my friends. And so I hope when you guys walk away, you feel like you have found a friend in these panelists too. So I know that's really cheesy and I debated saying it, but I had to because they're all awesome people. And you guys didn't come here to listen to me talk. So I'm gonna briefly introduce our panelists and then we'll just kind of dig right in. So Cece Glasgow Brown is the CEO of Black Pockets, and that's a business dedicated to healing modalities for Black, queer, and trans folks, including Indigenous people of color. They are the co-founder of Zeke's Freedom Foundation, and this is a nonprofit that addresses the disconnect that they saw between nonprofit groups and Black and communities of color. They were recently sworn in as the Public Safety Commissioner for the Kansas City LGBTQ Commission. And Cece is a gender nonconforming lesbian. Stephanie Byers retired after teaching music and orchestra, right, Stephanie? For 29 years at Wichita Public Schools. And now she and her wife, Lori, own a company that helps corporations and community groups reach and work with diverse communities. She's a member of the Chickasaw Nation, and she's the first openly transgender person elected to the state legislature and the first transgender Native American elected in the United States. And while Dr. Tori Gleason is currently the owner of a sports medicine chiropractor clinic in Goodland, Kansas, her passion is for creating better health outcomes for members of the LGBTQ community. And that includes rural health as well. This passion has led her to become a board member of the Goodland Regional Medical Center and a member of the World of Professional Association for Transgender Health. And she's currently working to obtain her Master's of Public Health. And I think she's really found her calling in that diversity and inclusion space. So what I would like to start with is just a basic, I'll ask Tori to kind of start. Tori, can you help define some of the terms that we've been hearing, like transgender, non-binary, gender non-conforming, and intersex?
Absolutely. Thank you, Katie. And thanks for letting me have the opportunity to be here today with my amazing friends and people I've never met before on the other side of the state. So I'm in Goodland, Kansas, in the middle of nowhere. At least you can see it from there anyway. You know, we often hear terms such as transgender, cisgender, especially in the news here lately. And the way I like to describe transgender is that if you take a pen in your right hand, and when you were born, the doctor said you're a left-handed person, and you're like, but I'm not a left-handed person, I write with my right hand. And you're just different, right? And so just different than the way the doctor assigned you, the doctor actually designated it on your birth certificate. You know, that would be an example of what somebody that's trans, right? Now, if you were born and you were left-handed and the doctor said you're left-handed and you write with your left hand, that's cis. So basically that what you were assigned and what you are they're congruent. And so basically that's the thing. So now if I took that right hand of that pen from my right hand to my left hand, it's not who I am. It's not how I write. It is not. And I've known since I was 5 years old who I am. And basically this is the way I try and describe the difference between cis and trans, is this just not congruent. And when I close my eyes, I know that I'm a right-handed person, just like I know that I am not male, even though that's what I was assigned at birth. And that's the way I try and have these conversations with people when it comes to the difference between cis and trans, is that for cis, which if you were assigned female at birth and you know that you're a female, then you are cis female. If you were assigned, you know, female at birth and you know you're a male, then you are a trans male, and so on. And so that's the way I like to try and describe that. Now there's you know, I'm on the alphabet and mafia side of TikTok. And so, and I represent a few of those letters on there, but we have other terms that may be confusing for some of you. When you hear the terms non-binary, gender queer, gender fluid, agender, bigender, and it gets confusing sometimes. And I get it, like we have to keep up. And, you know, especially in the clinical world, as we try and define through our sexual orientation, gender identity forms that we have in our electronic health records, is trying to give space for a person to tell you who they are and being able to respect them and their autonomy and be able to respect what they say. And so I oftentimes, even though I'm a member of the transgender community, I'm still learning too. And so this is part of that cultural humility piece, is that, and it's not competence, it's really humility when you think about it. And so we're all trying to learn more. We're all trying to engage, lean in, and just ask questions respectfully and with consent, but ask questions. And that's what today's all about.
And so then I will kind of open this up to the other panelists. Can someone talk a little bit more about what it means to be considered non-binary or maybe gender non-conforming? Cece, this might be a good one for you, but if Stephanie, if you want to jump in.
I'll let Cece go.
I have to unmute myself first there. Okay.
Okay, we'll get our group.
Yes, absolutely. So of course I'm speaking from a personal perspective because I do pronouns are they, them, she, hers. I do identify as gender non-conforming, or NB is a nice little abbreviation for non-binary. And honestly, I would have to say in my particular spot, it would be someone who is fluid between both genders. I know that sometimes I personally wake up and feel more masculine than feminine. Sometimes I wake up feeling more feminine than masculine. Sometimes I feel like wake up without any gender at all. And so it's actually more of a fluidity between that feminine and masculine identity, because it's not really a gender assignment at all, is the best way that I can particularly put it. But like Tori was saying, there's such a huge umbrella for it itself. So everyone has also their own personal definition of what it means for them. So I am, again, speaking from a personal place, but that is the best way I can describe it, is a fluidity between feminine and masculine, because it's a lot less identified with being male or female or man or woman.
So I think the follow-up to that is, why are pronouns important? And maybe Stephanie, you can field this one. Why are they important, and what happens if we make a mistake?
You know, pronouns are something that we use to identify ourselves with. They're a personal thing, and so when someone refers to us that in a certain way, that helps to affirm the identity that we ask them to give. And you know, it can be anything. We have people that go with, you know, she, her, and they, them, and he, him. But each person gets to select that for themselves. And one way to find out what a person's pronouns might possibly be is to introduce yourself and say your pronouns, opening the door to let them do it, because that way they can do that. the jury's kind of out between people in the community as to whether they want someone to ask them what their pronouns are. I know that I walked into an ice cream parlor dressed kind of like I am today, and the person on the other side of the counter looked at me and said, I want to do this right. What are your pronouns? And I'm going, well, I'm kind of advertising what my pronouns are, you know, and I really did not, because it kind of outed me. But if she had said to me, hi, I'm such and such, my pronouns are she and her, I would have said, oh, hi, I'm Stephanie, my pronouns are she and her also. And we could have connected that way without having to do that. They're incredibly important. We know that when a trans person, especially trans kids, if someone uses their pronouns, they use their name, not necessarily the name they were given at birth or the pronouns you would expect based upon their assignment at birth. But if they are given those two things, their incidence of depression drop considerably. Their incidence of suicide drop considerably. And it's so affirming to have someone verify who you are and so say those things outright. And if you make a mistake, and you, especially somebody you've known for a long time, and you do a mispronoun or misgendering or misname, just sit there and say, I'm sorry, I'll get better at it next time. And kind of move on and then make the effort. Also, practice. If someone in your life is transgender, practice their name, practice their pronouns when they're not around so it becomes the natural part of your thought processes. In my life, people that have known me since 2015. I transitioned to be authentic in 2014. People have known me since that time only know Stephanie. They have no problem. But people in my life that have known me forever, because I am 58 years old, sometimes we have to be kind of remind them they need to practice so that we don't accidentally make mistakes along those lines. But it's just affirming. It lifts us up and it helps to make us feel proper in who we are.
And Mona let me know that my audio is a little lagging. So if it gets bad, I might turn my camera off, because what would a Zoom meeting be without a little technical difficulties, right? And so we had one question, we had a couple questions come in, but one in particular. So how do I address you if all I know is what I'm seeing? And what if I get it wrong? So what if you see someone and you are unsure of what pronouns, but you know, I know you addressed it a little bit, Stephanie, but does somebody want to kind of field that question for us?
I can kind of speak a little bit. Let me wait. I want to make sure you were done talking there. Okay. I can say they did kind of answer a little bit when it comes to first just addressing your pronouns first whenever you introduce yourself to someone. But if you're worried about how someone presents, that's kind of the point of why pronouns are so important, because you may see someone who presents themselves to be a woman or presents themselves to be a man, but they may identify as a completely different pronoun completely. So it's always important just to address pronouns, and it is hard to get used to. We're so used to being in the comfort of labels and our pronouns being based on what we present ourselves as, that it's even hard for me. I've misgendered people before. I've also used the wrong pronouns before. So it's, again, like we were saying, when it comes to apologizing, I also think it's important to thank the person who may correct you, to saying thank you for giving me the correct information, because I think in a way it affirms them opposed to saying sorry, because I'm not sorry for my pronouns. And I'm not sorry that we had to have the conversation of correcting them either, because it's, again, an important conversation to have. So thank whoever takes the time to actually correct you, because it may have been also a brave thing for them to do for that day. They may have never stuck up for themselves or their pronouns. So I would thank that person for even providing you with that information and trusting you with it. And then I would move on with the conversation, because, again, I've done this and it's been a quick fix, and then we've gone on about our day, because we also don't want to make pronouns a huge issue either, or a huge elephant in the room, because then it continues being uncomfortable. But just a suggestion.
That makes sense. And I think as humans, we tend to make mistakes occasionally, right? Especially when we are programmed to think one way, or to live in a more binary world. So it's okay. I hear what I hear you guys saying is, or you all saying is that it's okay when it happens. Don't dwell on it, and just be conscious and try to do better as we go forward. do you think that one of you could field a question? How are sexual orientation and gender identity different? I think that sometimes people, Stephanie, sometimes people get that wrong, so I will let you go forward with it.
The best explanation that I have ever heard, and it's kind of base, but it's very true. Sexual orientation is who you want to go to bed with. Gender identity is who you want to go to bed as. So one has to do with who you are, the other has to do with your attractions and those things. And so for a person who's transgender, for instance, as a trans woman, I consider my orientation to be that of a lesbian. Before I began living authentically, people saw me as a straight male because I was attracted to women then. I am still attracted to women now. So my gender identity is now authentic. We can actually see who I am, but my sexual orientations remain constant. And so it's just they're intertwined in some ways, but they're actually separate elements of who we are. And even when we get into attraction, there are so many other elements that come up because we do have a sexual attraction for certain people. We have a biological attraction. We may have an emotional attraction, a mental attraction. And sometimes those things can exist all across the board and in different directions all at the same time. That's why you might see someone who is male that, very much sexually oriented towards women, but they spend all their time hanging out with other men because that may be where an emotional attraction exists. What we would refer to sometimes as the traditional bromance. But it's just they're separate parts of who we are. And because we have this alphabet that we use, that we kind of all are connected together through those things.
And would you also, to follow up on that, talk a little bit about what trans male or a trans woman is? I think that I've seen lately a little bit of confusion in those terms. So can you just please define those for us?
Basically put, a person whose gender identity is male, but the gender they were assigned or the sex they were assigned at birth, what the doctor spanked them and gave a physical exam, told their parents, here, this is what you have, they're not congruent. So a person who was assigned female at birth, but identifies as male or any gender other than female, that would be someone who would be trans. If they identify as male, trans male. A person who was assigned male at birth, like I was, but I identify as female, I am a trans woman or trans female. We can go trans girl, trans boy. Bottom line is we're talking about boys, we're talking about girls, and we're talking about people that flow somewhere between on the spectrum, so that they can have that opportunity to be who they are regardless of the day. And there are some people that they say, hey, I know what the sex was that I was assigned at birth. I don't identify as any of that. And so I just maybe refer to myself as asexual. I just don't have a gender or a gender. So those are the things we talk about.
And it's the gender that they currently identify with, not what they were born with, which is sometimes where I see a disconnect in people talking.
I think one of the things that I have to clarify on that, Katie, is that, my gender of being female has always been my gender. My sex, my physical body was what I was born with. Gender is not necessarily on the outside as much as it is on the inside.
And thank you for correcting me on that. I appreciate that. So if someone is transitioning, what does that mean? And what are some of the legal documents that somebody could transition, or what are some of the documents that you think about, right? I think people often think medical transition, but I would like us to have a more broad definition of that. So does someone who would like to field that question? Go ahead, Stephanie.
Tori and Cece, please feel free to jump in on things. I'm a part of a community that we're trying as a trans person to move away from the term transition because, as I said previously, I've always known myself to be a girl, and then as I grew up to be a woman, even if my body didn't show it, neither the world around me didn't. So when I began living my authentic life, who transitioned were all the people around me. And so when we talk about that term in the common usage of it, transition can be just a social thing. You do no medical interventions, you do no legal changes, you simply begin to present as the person that you know yourself to be and ask people around you to kind of comply and do the same thing. So they transition into that. A legal transition is going through your documents, making sure that your name is correct, that it matches up to who you are. And depending upon which state you're in, depending upon how you want to do this, there are different ways to do that as well. There's also Social Security. Many of us don't realize that our gender is recorded on our Social Security card. You have to get, those things can be transitioned and changed over. Passports can be changed over, and that creates that legal paper trail of who you are. And that, credit cards, utility bills, car titles, and it just keeps going on and on and on to the legal side of things. And then medical transition is usually one we typically think of. And even that, people do various aspects of it. There is surgical interventions, there are hormonal interventions, and sometimes it's just ways of blocking your naturally occurring hormones so that you can live authentically as to who you are as well. And so when we talk about transition, those are the things and the aspects that we're talking about. And like I said, for most trans people, we're not actually transitioning. We are who we are. We're just transitioning the rest of you to see who we are.
So to follow up from that, how should we talk about that? This is kind of an unscripted question because that's common nomenclature, transitioning. So what would be appropriate to say? Living your authentic self, or can you help correct me a little bit?
Or you can go ahead, because I could tell you had something you wanted to say, so I wanted to give you that thumbs up.
So, yes, we're kind of, that's kind of an antiquated term, that the transitioning, even though I still use it because it's what people still use and people understand. Like, I try and give people a space for grace because, again, I'm in a town of 3,600 people with 3 stoplights and we only need 1. And so people are transitioning around me. People are getting used to it. Like, I'm the first trans person they know. And so, I try and I allow myself, not every trans person is the same, but I allow myself to answer questions, and some people don't, and that's fine. If they ask for consent, like, may I ask you a question? Usually I know where this is headed. And so, but we'll have all kinds of questions and conversations, but I understand that I'm under a microscope in my rural Western Kansas community. And so I still use transitioning, even though I understand. But yeah, I've always been this person. I'm just now, for my gender expression, how I present to the world, I'm socially and transitioning as well as medically transitioning. And again, whether a person socially or medically transitions or not, they're still valid. They're still trans. They are who they are. And so, and that's an important thing. You don't have to have any procedures, any social transitioning, anything to be any less trans. You just are who you are. And so allowing that I guess that personal autonomy and that authentic self to come through, and just honoring who they are in that moment. And if they share those things with you, those are private things to keep between the two of you and not to share and broadcast, because we are out there in the public.
And so to expand on that a little bit, how, especially as a member of the medical community, how can we support our friends who might be, who might be trying to live their authentic self? How can we support them and still respect their privacy?
I think it's just, again, number one, being a good advocate and a great ally. And unfortunately, we know that 23 to 33% of people will not go to a general practitioner just because of horrible experiences. Refusal to be treated. There was a suicide survey that was done by, or attempted suicide done by the Williams Institute. Basically, those people that had attempted, 60% of them had been refused treatment. And so, which is a very common thing within our community. Unfortunately, unfortunately, Arkansas just passed a law that allowed people to refuse to treat you just because of a conscious decision to not agree with somebody. And so it is. So advocating and being a better ally to say no. Like, listen, we all take an oath in healthcare, every one of us, and it's not a refusal or if we don't agree with somebody, it's we take care of everyone, irregardless of who they are. And so being a better advocate and ally, I believe, is the important thing. Having those conversations about where they're at. Like, not everybody that's trans or non-binary feels comfortable sharing those things. Those are gender affirming procedures, those that, whether they be surgically or medically. But at the same time, not everyone wants to share those things. For me, I tend to overshare. That's what I do best at times, my friends tell me. And so I think having those conversations, but really my hope is everyone in this room is a better ally and advocate for the trans and the LGBTQ community.
It may seem, I'm sorry, Katie, but it may seem common sense, but don't ask a trans person intimate questions about their body that you wouldn't ask somebody else, and use the same circumstances. You're not going to go up to somebody who is male and say, "So you circumcised?" So why would you go to a trans person and say, "So if you had the bottom surgery?" Those questions are personal. They don't need to be addressed. And kind of like Tori was saying, I'm an open book on these things as well, because I realize that people are curious. They need somebody they can talk to. But be polite, because not every trans person is going to want to answer those questions, and most will even be a little bit offended by them. So it's just a matter of treating trans people the same way you treat everybody else.
Yes.
And go ahead, Cece. Do you have something to say as well?
I was literally just going to back them up on both of them on the comments made, because again, kind of like they both were saying specifically, is like ultimately this is a conversation about body parts. When it comes down to someone outside of the community, a lot of their questions are in reference to that or procedures, and the best way to be there for someone is the best, like they said, use your humility. The best way to be there for anyone. And your friends better than I ever would. So I couldn't give you better advice that you already have from knowing them on a personal level, what they may need, or as your friend, how they may feel about X, Y, and Z. So again, just like they said, be there for them like you would anybody else. And remember that ultimately it's down to what we look like, in our most intimate private spaces, and outside of just recognizing the humanity of it all, the fact that we are just people wanting to live our lives without fear of persecution, and possible harm. So yeah, just wanted to back them up on that. Just treat us like we want to be treated. The golden rule in every religion.
And I also just want to take a second right now and say thank you guys for being so open and willing to share, because I always kind of joke, well, we all have Google, but at the same time, it's nice to actually see and have real life people that you can put some humanity into the situation, right? So how this is kind of a very deep question, so I think everyone should have probably some time to answer this, but how do we talk to our communities about these issues? How do we talk to our communities about being better allies? And so I don't know who wants to start. I'll just kind of turn it over to you, but how do we start the conversation when we're comfortable to?
One of the first things I think we need to address is the fact that as human beings, regardless of our gender, regardless of our presentation of who we are, we have this rich diversity of who we are, our appearances, our thoughts, our dreams. And when you start talking about someone who is transgender, that's just one aspect of who they are. And is it the most important aspect of who they are? For a trans person in the moment, it might be, but there are other things that go along with that. So when we start trying to address communities, we're basically looking at usually the discrimination against those small areas instead of looking at the commonalities. And so, if you were to look at me and say, well, you're a trans woman. Yes. I have 9 grandchildren, so that makes me a grandparent. I have 2 sons and 2 stepsons. My mom and dad are living and loving of me, and so I'm someone's child. I'm a retired educator. Obviously, I play guitar. There are all these other commonalities that we can address, and so it's kind of reminding people that we're trying to, when we start looking at being allies, we're looking at someone on the opposite side trying to other someone, and instead of being othering, we need to look at how we can be inclusive.
I think it's important to have conversations about that. Like I'm somebody's sister. I'm a mom to 2 kids. I'm a business owner. I'm a healthcare provider. I'm on a hospital board and appointed for my 4th 3-year term. I mean, we're members of the community, and yet we face an enormous amount of discrimination. And because of that, disparities in health equity. We have 4 times the eating disorder risk. We have increased rates of diabetes, increased rates of smoking. We have twice the unemployment rate. 77% of our kids are 77% of trans kids are harassed in K through 12 education. 14% of us are homeless. There's some, I mean, it's just when you think about those health inequalities and those inequities, it's just really hard to understand that there is so much in that. Here's the thing. I got outed as trans in my rural community. 50% of my practice walked away. My clinical skill set didn't change. I'm the same person, but 50% of my business just got up and left because they didn't agree with me anymore. Like my skills were less valid at this point in time. And so, but that's a reality, right? Like when I was perceived as cisgender in the cis het normative world, like I was asked to be on every committee. I was asked to be all these things that basically I acknowledge my privilege because I have less melanin in my skin. I know where I stood. And then all of a sudden it was, you know what? We don't need you to be on the committee anymore. We no longer need you coaching our kids. We no longer need you to be part of this circle. And I was no longer welcome because of one thing that changed about me. And really, I didn't change, just everyone's perception of me did change.
Yeah, well, my particular perception, we're talking about uncomfortable conversations that we still can't have when it comes to being a part of intersectionalities in general. So unfortunately, we have to challenge these things at every level possible because of that. I'm still fighting inequalities as a Black person, let alone a gender nonconforming person, as a queer person. So we literally have several different facets and several different movements all in one. Until we start challenging everyone from every perspective. I'm talking about at dinner tables, to boardrooms, to classrooms. It's still going to be a conversation that we have to have in these particular settings where people are actually signing up to come and hold these conversations, opposed to us just putting it in their faces. So it's actually something I'm very excited for the commission side of things, for being on the LGBTQ commission, because I can actually go and have these uncomfortable conversations directly with people who make legislative changes in hopes to possibly hold these very uncomfortable conversations in these spaces, because that's honestly the way we're going to have to see change. And also putting people in spaces to actually not sit at a table, but also be able to speak at the same time. Because the more we sit and talk about it, and the less we do about it, it's just going to be a conversation 10, 20, 30 years from now, unfortunately, like racism, unfortunately, like ageism, unfortunately, like sexism is. So I think that is the most important thing, is actually challenging these things where we will actually see change even in the most uncomfortable spaces.
I think Tori told me, I think it was Tori about a week ago. She said, if there's not if there's not a chair at the table for you, bring a folding chair. And that I've just been thinking about that lately. So thanks for that note, Tori. So what do you want us to know about you or the transgender or gender nonconforming community in general?
Since everybody was at a me question, I'm not sure. I'm sorry.
That an everybody question. Yep. Sorry. I could have been more explicit. And Stephanie, you're unmuted first. Cece remuted herself, so you could go first.
There's a lot of misinformation and disinformation about the trans community out there right now. A tremendous amount. And you know, it's frustrating because in many respects, especially trans youth are being used as pawns to try to get people to lean one way or another way. And you know, it's important to read up, ask questions, find a good source. As we were talking about, yeah, if you don't have a seat at the table, they're serving you on the menu. Um, and I can tell you, as someone who has a seat at the table, sometimes it's both at the same time. And you know, trying to get people to know what reality is as opposed to perception. And it's just take the time to get to know somebody. And if you do know somebody, take the time to stand up for them and say, hey, that's my friend, or I know a person like this, and what you're saying isn't true. So that we can start looking to have authentic conversations about people trying to live authentic lives.
And that's why I hoped one of the outcomes today would be that everybody that leaves here can say that they have a friend and put a face to a name. So Cece, do you want to go next on that question? What's something that you wish that we knew about you or about the trans and gender non-conforming community in general?
Sure. I actually didn't want to take up space during the transition conversation, but for me, even in the form of transitioning, for myself, it went from being recognizing who I was from a gender expression to actually being a gender identity. So I am actually still evolving as someone who identifies as gender non-binary, non-conforming, gender fluid. I'm still figuring that part out particularly. So I think people also need to recognize it's not even a look to it or a sound to it. Again, that's just why we respect particular pronouns, and we just ask people to and give space for people to feel safe and even recognizing who they are in any particular format. And when it comes to our community as a whole, just as we said, we have to get comfortable with uncomfortable conversations and remember the difference between impact and intention. You may have the intentions of actually doing well for somebody or not meaning any harm, but the impact of something you may have said or something that you may have done or lack thereof could greatly affect someone. So I think we definitely should remember that as well.
I think the other thing for me is understanding that there's a lot of us out there, right? And you know, and I know the estimates are 0.6 to 1% of the population. Truthfully, it's probably closer to 1 to 2% of the population. But based on the Williams Institute and their numbers, Kansas has 9,300 trans adults. We have 1,300 trans youth, but that's the 1,300 is 0.66% of the population. If you look at the CDC studies, it's closer to 1.8 to 2.1%. So it's not even close. So if you're looking at 10 to 15,000 people in Kansas, if you look at the Missouri side, there's 25,000 trans adults in Missouri. There's 2,500, and based on these lower percentages, there's 2,500 youth aged 13 to 17 in Missouri. So there's a lot of us out there. And the bad thing is that when you look at the fact that you may not know somebody, like, here's the thing, as a provider, right? Like, you think and after I got outed, I had patients that I've been treating for years that said, I'm trans too. I didn't know. And so again, if I don't know, I'm a member of the community, it's so you don't know either. I guarantee all of you have a friend or a family member or somebody in your direct circle that is trans or non-binary. They just may have not found the courage to tell you yet, that bravery. And so they haven't had a Brene Brown moment like the rest of us have. So.
And oh, sorry, Cece.
Okay.
I also just wanted to remind people to also remember access as well. Some people may not even feel safe in the space to even admit that. So a lot of surveys and numbers are very, very underreported because, like I just said, as a 35-year-old person, 2 years ago, I would not have identified as that, but that does not mean that I was not a part of that particular statistic. So we have to remember some people don't even have access to even present themselves as who they truly are due to safety, due to being in particular communities that may harm them just for trying to put on makeup one day or even painting their nails. So again, that's also, even with that being said, there's a disparity very largely in communities of color, specifically Black, trans, and gender nonconforming communities, because our homeless numbers are way higher than 14%. So that's also something to remember as well.
And piggybacking off of what both Cece and Tori said, you can have someone who's been in your life Like I was with my parents for, before I came out, 49 years. They had no idea. Was I not trans until they found out when I was 49 years old? No, I've been trans the whole time. Been trans in a community, hearing the jokes, hearing the statements, keeping my mouth closed because it wasn't safe. And so there are people around you who are living in that frustration of knowing who they are, but not being able to tell even the people they're closest to for fear of what the reaction would be. And so always keeping that kindness about you, knowing that the way that you speak about trans people when you don't think there's anybody there is still important, because there could be. And there's probably a lot more of us than we see. You know, we're seeing what seems to be an acceleration of people coming out as trans. And it's not really that there's more trans people, it's just that we're living in a society where it's becoming more safe to be that way, although not in every walk and not in every space at this point. But so we're seeing more people who are willing to stand up and say who they are. And I think that it's just important to remember that, you know, you take care of people and be kind to people, because you don't know who they really are until they show you.
I think another thing, if you're in a space where you're an HR or somebody that's in charge of hiring or part of the people culture, I think also just being like, I don't have, you know, I know this is a highly debated topic. I don't have passing privilege. I fit in like a purple cow in a field of black and white cows. Like I walk into a supermarket, everybody knows. It's just the way it goes. And so, but there's nothing worse than like, you know, like here, I've been applying for jobs lately, and for a new career, and so sitting those in, and like it's always fun when I get on Zoom spaces. It feels like a Catfish episode. Their body language changes, everything changes. You're like, well, I know how this is going to go, and they always say the same thing. Well, your resume was amazing, but we're going a different direction with this one. And so, and it's hard. Like in the cis het world, never had a problem with a job. Now I have a problem with a job. And so like I applied for 70 positions. I've been turned down for over 40 positions now. And so it's just like, you know, and if I, being a non-person of color, if I can't make it with a terminal degree, with 15 years of healthcare experience, how the heck are they going to make it? And so get to know them personally. Don't have those you know, I know that we have that implicit bias. I know that we have those things that we're born with, and I get it. But at the same time, I want to say, just be kind, just hear them out, see them for their skill set, not how they present to the world.
And I am going to have to do a shameless plug for our next panel. On May 11th, we are talking about trans and non-binary individuals in the workplace. And so you can go ahead if you would like to register on Central Exchange's website, but that's a very, I don't know, I think a conversation that we have not had enough. Anyway, I don't want to spoil that. I want to focus on what we're here to focus on today, but what you brought up, Tori, is a good point to that. Anything else that you guys have? We have another question that I find very interesting, but I don't want to stop that conversation. Is there anything else that before we switch gears a little bit that you guys want to let us know? So the next question is, I'm going to submit it anonymously, but I'm going to just read it out to you guys. I'm a genderqueer femme, and I'm often given the opportunity to participate in things like women's leadership trainings. I have found that these are really helpful to me because, having been raised a girl, I do have many of the same hangups that women have when it comes to leaderships. Although helpful, I still find these experiences a bit alienating, and that I can't bring my authentic self to the table because the space is full of and created for cis women. Do you have any advice on how I can navigate these spaces?
I can definitely relate to that heavy, because I do still have a lot of parts of me that do identify with being a woman, because of like what they said. When you're raised that way, there's just particular things that you always identify with. And so when it comes to spaces like that, that is another point of challenge. Basically, you just challenge that, come into those spaces as your authentic self, recognizing that these need to be femme spaces and not necessarily women-centered spaces. And you also challenging those particular spaces, which is very hard to do because, of course, as women identified people, they also are marginalized, also experience a lot of discrimination. So we're not trying to take up space in those particular ways, but we have to start recognizing that the energy levels are from feminine and masculine perspectives are very important to have no matter what your gender identity may be, because it's a balance in self in general. And that's kind of what Black Pockets LLC is about, is just recognizing the balance in self. No matter what your purpose is, as long as you are in a balanced space, you're more likely to serve your purpose, no matter what that may be. And so I do go into spaces like that. But yes, you do feel alienated and you don't feel like you want to speak up, but I do. And you'll be surprised about how many people that come into those spaces feel exactly the same way you do. And you just giving them a voice, you just giving them more space to then step up and speak how they want to. Because again, you can invite us to a table, but if we can't stand up and speak at it and actually feel like we're going to be heard and like we exist, then that table is just as flawed as any other patriarchy that there is. So you have to show up and challenge that too.
I think also that, she talked about, CC talked about basically that it's that code switching that a lot of times that we do, that we show up and we alter our gender expression. We alter the way we speak, our mannerisms. Like I may be a little more animated when I'm in a safe space, but if I'm in a space with this primarily designed for cis het women, I'm going to be different there than I'm going to be around with my queer community. And so I changed based on perceived fair treatment, based on perceived safety. I am going to absolutely, like I talk one way with my farmer agriculture people than I do with my queer community comes in my office. I code switch all the time. And it's exhausting though. That's the thing that people don't know. Like when I show up for an interview, in Zoom, I guess, if I can't show up as my authentic self, it's exhausting to have to know how, because you're thinking about how am I perceived, how am I looking, how do I sound, is my pitch, my resonance, am I a little twangy in my voice, am I not twangy enough, am I still representing who I am I safe in this space? So there's so many things to think about, and then you're facing those micro and macro aggressions at the same time. It's exhausting. And so you walk out of an interview just mentally fatigued, or a social event like a space for women in education or women in leadership. And so making sure that you create a culture where it's okay to have your authentic self show up, and we value who you are, your autonomy, and make sure that it's okay and to be celebrated for who you are.
So on the flip side of that, what can these organizations do or implement to be more inclusive? And to let you know that you are here and you can be your authentic self in this space.
I'll start with this one. So I think the biggest thing is that depending on the size of your organization, but even if it's a one person operation, you need to have a plan for diversity, equity, and inclusion, period. You need to make sure that if it's the employees on the one side of the desk feel included, they feel like they're a part of the team, and not just this, we want to put you in a box and this is how you're supposed to act, but making sure that you're looking at those social cues, making sure that, again, that you're looking at the micro and macro aggressions that exist, and those social norms, and the way we look at implicit and explicit bias. And so I think it's important, like, if you're in a healthcare facility or anything else, the first thing you do, your take home Monday morning thing, is you start a DEI committee Monday, period. And you make sure that at that table are unusual, unheard voices, and you make sure that you actually engage in conversation. And I think the biggest thing is we want a diverse voice, because we're a diverse country, we're a diverse people. And so making sure that you're representing not just the people working there, but are we seeing our customer, our client, our patient, and do they feel seen? Because again, people vote with their feet. They walk out your door and they won't come back. But make sure that your people that come to you for services feel seen, they feel included, they feel affirmed in who they are.
Stephanie or Cece, anything to add to that question?
There's so many just little bitty things you can do. As we're all looking here at Tori's background, and you see the trans and rainbow flag flying behind her. a small flag or button, something that lets people know that you are an ally of the community, helps to open those spaces up to become inclusive. You know, one of my stepsons is a physician in Texas, and 6 foot tall, walks into a room to see a patient wearing cowboy boots, and he doesn't want them to be uncomfortable. So on his ID badge, he has a little rainbow just to walk through the door. And so people go, so why are you wearing that rainbow? And he can sit there and say, well, because my mom's wife is a member of the community. And I just want to let you know that I'm an ally of the community. You know, doing things that open those doorways so that people can find out who you are. And then also be very, very aware that even someone that you perceive to be the same as you has a different microculture than you, and they have a different perspective. You know, somebody that you've known may have a brother or a sister who is transgender or non-conforming. They may have someone who's a part of the LGBTQ community, and you make sure that you open those doorways up for that friendliness, for that inclusion, for that kindness. And as Tori was saying, look at those equity issues. What can you really do? And equity, not equality. We're trying to make sure that everybody has the same opportunities, but from what, you know, through the filters that they bring with them in that life so that they can make the most of who they are.
And just because I do have to make the plug, of course, Black Pocket LLC, Zeke's Freedom Foundation, both organizations I help co-found with my partner, Moon Glasgow Brown. We do provide that particular cultural competency trainings. We will go out to organizations specifically to have that, because unfortunately people need to understand that that is not something that can be white led. Again, that's putting us back in that comfort space of white people leading other white people on how to be inclusive. That doesn't make any sense. Unfortunately, it's not going to work very well for you. So we will come in and we will provide training for you all. So you definitely can feel free to contact us. We are available on all social media sites. Again, that's Black Pockets LLC, and we will be more than happy to come out for, of course, a fee, because our Black labor and emotional labor is not free. But we will absolutely come out and provide you all with education and resources, as well as the best way to dismantle these systems, because they all are based on white elitism. And that is why they do not fit for most of us, because even if you are not a person of color, you are still stuck underneath the oppression that is the white patriarchy. So that is one of the best ways to do it, is to defund and dismantle these systems. But of course, we all have to agree to do that as a whole. And so we can always come in and help you when it comes to identifying when, how, and why that is important to do so.
I think also to kind of, I guess, piggyback off of Stephanie's comment on the name badges. If you go to like Children's Mercy and seeing the LGBTQ pins and the pronoun pins on name badges, allowing your people at your organization to be included and affirmed, allow them to put their pronouns on their name badges. It basically, it's a conversation starter. If anything, it makes people feel more inclusive. The same thing for your Zoom name. Change your Zoom name, put your pronouns in there, because are we going to assume it based on your gender expression? We know how that goes for a lot of us. So take the time in any business Zoom room you're in to change your name and just put your pronouns behind it. It's another way to allow, especially if you're a cishet person, it allows people that are a member of the LGBTQ community to feel more included, to feel more like, hey, this is a safe space for me, and to show up. Same thing, email signatures in your business emails, sticking your pronouns down there and hey, what is this? And attaching a link to a PDF that allows people to understand. It creates a space for grace. It creates a space where we can have conversation and dialogue, and allows people to feel like you can bring your queer self to work and you are fine and loved for who you are. Because I can tell you this, when you are a member of a sex and gender minority community or any minority community, if you feel like there's a place for you, I guarantee your execution, the work you put out, and the way you are as a team member is so much better when you feel like this is a place where, you know, it's like when we played tag when we were kids. You had a place you called base. You were safe. Allow work to be base. Allow it to be safe. Allow people to feel included.
Okay, another question. And I'm we're fielding questions from the group now. So if you want to throw them in the chat, Mona will send them over. So this question is, I thought the word queer was in poor taste, but I'm hearing it over and over again. What are the rules around these words? And are there any insulting words that we need to be aware of? Stephanie, go for it.
So words like queer, the community's kind of taken them back. And it's like so many other terms that are utilized. If you are not a part of the community, maybe you should not use that word. But if someone around you does, appreciate the fact they do it. In the trans community, there are so many bad words at this point in time. And let me put it this way. If you hear the word tranny, they better be talking about the transmission in a car. Okay, that's not for people. If someone talks about a transvestite, were they born in 1910? Those terms are gone. We don't use those terms anymore. Really, when we talk about trans women, and they're separate words, not one word, but basically we're talking about women who may have been identified something different at birth. And that's all we're looking at. And so just don't go out of your way to create a new label, and listen to the conversations going on. And it's okay to ask, on some things like that. Say, okay, I'm hearing, the three of us that serve in the Kansas House of Representatives that are part of the LGBTQ community, we refer to ourselves as the Queer Caucus. And we've had other people go, I thought that was a bad term. And so for them to say, well, you can call this the Rainbow Caucus. There are a lot of ways that we can do this, but realize that we identify ourselves, we choose our own terms, and those are the words that we use.
I don't understand the use of they as a pronoun. It just sounds plural. And so I would love any insight that can be shared.
Yes, so due to the English language, we've learned that they is a plural, and that's literally the only reason why that's uncomfortable for most people. It's a word that helps some non-binary people better identify because we don't identify as he or she. So they just kind of helps, because if I feel like a plethora or even like a fluidity between the two, they almost make sense. Because sometimes I am maybe one more than one person. And that's kind of like an inside joke in the community, but also some people have several different pronouns. Like if you went to go look up a pronoun list, you are actually getting off lucky with they, because they can get pretty extensive. There's ze, zer, there's several different pronouns. Like I could literally pull up the list now to go through it, at least half of them. But again, it's basically the best way to refer to someone who does not necessarily go by he or she. And that is why when you start a conversation saying, hi, my name is Cece, my pronouns are they, them, they can then present themselves by saying, oh, hello, my name is X, and these are my pronouns, because even they may not be correct. So it is hard for people to understand. And that's even been hard for me, because if I see someone who's male presenting, I automatically want to call them he. But if they have pronouns of they, them, I literally have to correct myself personally as a gender nonconforming person several times. So again, we have been carefully taught how to label things and how to put things in their own little boxes and spaces based on how they are presented. And that is kind of why we have these conversations, so that we can move ourselves away from that. Because these are all self-identifications. You as an individual person get to decide what these identities are. And that is the most important part. Unfortunately, it is not about your comfort of how they, them feels. And I promise I do not mean that in a rude way, but that's literally the point. It's just getting comfortable with things that aren't familiar to you, because maybe one day you may turn around and decide that you have a different pronoun you want to go by. And so you want to be just as respected for that.
And Stephanie, did you have an addition to that?
I wanted to point out the fact that we use they and them in the singular in common usage all the time. Your doorbell rings. You've ordered pizza 25 minutes ago, but you're busy. And so you say, hey, pizza's at the door. Somebody go get it from them and pay them. You have no idea who is standing at the door. You know it's not going to be 15 people delivering your pizza. And yet we still say they and them because we don't know what gender. And so that's how we use it. They went that away. Again, it's a singular usage. And so it's almost like we know what we do, and now we're going to create something new to be different. No, it's just usually they as a singular like we have this whole time.
It's almost like people feel they're getting forced to do something. So now suddenly it's questionable, really, honestly. Like, but yes, thank you for bringing that up.
I would also like to say my cousin is a non-binary person, and practice is the other piece of this. It is hard to remember somebody's pronouns, and it's hard to change your thought process, but I promise it gets easier as you do it and as you say it. Okay, so I understand that transgender, non-binary, and others of marginalized genders are the victims of harassment and violence. What are the best ways to build trust without tokenizing?
I kind of think that just goes back a little bit to what we were saying. Just treat them like you would someone you want to get to know for the first time. Don't make the conversation about anything they've done with their bodies or how their bodies may feel. Like, just have a general conversation like you would anyone else. Build trust by giving trust and being a trustworthy person, having integrity. I know, again, it seems hard just because we're talking about something that's very sensitive, but when someone genuinely feels like you have, like, if you mean well, just like Stephanie and Tori were both saying, that they'll be an open, an open book. I'll be an open book. If I know you mean well, I have no problem answering questions for you. I'd rather you ask than just assume. But I'm also not going to trust you with this information based on how you're presenting yourself to me as well. So just act as a trustworthy person, and you will be trusted with a lot of information, whether it has to do with this conversation or another.
I love that, Cece. Thank you. Um, so another question, can you guys put your contact information in the chat if you are comfortable? We had a couple of questions about like Cece's consulting fees. So if you're comfortable, put how you would prefer to be contacted in the chat. That would work, I think, to address that. And then one other question, we've discussed gender nonconforming quite a bit. How is that different than non-binary? And whoever wants to take that one, feel free to unmute and jump.
I want to check before talking. Either of you want to speak on that first? I mean, honestly, again, it's just a self-identification. Some people prefer non-binary, but some people feel like there is no binary, so I prefer non-conforming. And then some people are like, well, what am I conforming to? So they don't want to use that. I actually like the word gender fluid, but because it's less used and even more confusing for people due to the other two existing, I will accept NB, which is non-binary. And that actually is, it's ENBY, because again, the non part kind of makes it feel like there's something we're not doing correct. And that's not the case. And then some people prefer the gender nonconforming, again, because the binary is referring to as if a binary exists. So I think it's all, again, about a self-acceptance or a self identification on that. And I prefer NB, the ENBY, because it's a whole community of people. And it's grown its own movement. And so that's what I personally identify with as. But that's really just, it's really just about preference. There are literal general definitions, but that for me is just as oppressive and smothering as any other patriarchy or defined definition of things. So I try not to feed into these general idea, like definitions and descriptions of things, because these are, again, coming from a societal point of view.
Also, I think that, again, in the medical community, a lot of the literature is TGNC, it's transgender non-conforming, which I hate that the conforming thing. As Cece said, like, what are we conforming to? Like, there is no normal. That's the setting on your dryer, and that's it. And so the reality is that I prefer using like gender expansive as kind of an umbrella term, because I think that represents more, because it gives more room for, all right, are you binary, non-binary? All of that fits under gender expansive. And we use that term typically more when it comes to adolescent and trans children as well, and that trans pop. And so I like the term basically gender expansive.
And I would add into that, when we talk about gender nonconforming, that could be someone who is sex assigned at birth, and their gender identity align, they're congruent, but there's something about their presentation that moves outside that gender basis. Whether, I'm older, so I realize this has changed a little bit, but you can have someone who's wearing nail polish and eyeshadow, who is male. They're perfectly content in their malehood and every which way aspect of it, but they're going to move outside the gender norm. And so that would put them as a gender non-conforming person because they have some behavior or something that they do about themselves that moves beyond the acculturation of what it means to be that particular gender.
And again, another bit of personal experience, it can be intimidating to feel that you don't know what you're talking about, or you don't know if you're going to use the right terms. I think at the end of the day, just come at things with a good intention and an open, honest mind instead of worrying about saying the exact right thing. I don't know if you guys would agree with that. I am not seeing any other questions. So is there anything else? Mona, have you received any other questions?
I believe we're up to date. If I miss somebody's question, please put it in the chat to me again, and I'll make sure that it gets asked.
And I want to say, so the next few panels, we're having different panels come in. They can be found on Central Exchange's website, but the next one is workplace. There is a parenting and youth panel, and there is a sports panel. So these are all going to be once a month. So obviously this one, May, June, and July. And the second Tuesday of each month at 11:30. So I hope that you found value in this. Before we end, I will open it one more time up for Stephanie, Toy, or Cece, just to say any last closing remarks or anything that we missed. And thank you guys so much. I'm going to have Stephanie go first, just because I know she does have a engagement at 1 o'clock she has to be there for. But Stephanie, turn it to you.
I would say this: you don't have to understand. Just be kind. Just treat people with kindness. And if you gain understanding, fantastic. But just be willing to be kind to people. Take people for who they are, how they are, and let them be themselves.
And thank you, Stephanie, for sharing in this space. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate that. This conversation has even been helpful for me, and I'm the moderator. No one knows it all, right? So, and whenever you have to jump off, feel free. And then Toy or Cece, are there any other closing remarks that you want to make?
I think that's that humility part, right? I mean, we're not here, we're not competent, we're all learning, we're all trying. And just to be, it's a humility piece where we're just learning. And I'm a sponge. I'm taught every day by my patients. The second you think you know it all, another patient walks in and teaches you something else, and we know we don't know it all. And so to jump off of what Stephanie said, I mean, she said, just be kind. And it's true. Like, it's not hard. You actually have to put more effort into being a jerk than you do to be kind. So just be kind to all of us. And then also, the worst place in the world is Facebook in the messages and comments. And so, it's a bad place to be. Don't hang out there. It's very depressing. And so it's hard to read those, even though we know we're not supposed to. But we get destroyed in the comments, and it doesn't matter about what it's about. It could be the NCAA having a support. It could be about something else. We absolutely get destroyed in that. And so be great allies and friends for us, stand up for us, and, encourage people to be kind. And so that's kind of what I have to add.
I first wanted to also thank both of the other panelists. It was very nice to meet you all, even though it was in a virtual setting. Thank you all for everyone, even at Central Exchange, Katie, for even having me here in this particular space, because it is an important conversation. And there's several other people you could have asked. So thank you all for asking me. And the only other suggestion I would have is just to keep educating yourself. I learn new things every day, even about my own community, learn new things about people around me, because I am open to it. I do not assume to be an expert at everything. I'm always not just a teacher, but also a learner at the same time. And I also would just suggest that anybody who feels the need to create a space or want to be a part of a movement, you can do so in your own way. You do not have to make a lot of noise to be a part of a movement, just support something, particularly in your own way. And so you don't feel like you have to show up at a protest or show up at a particular argument. You can just be the person who provides the waters that day. You know, however you want to contribute is appreciated in every way. And just make sure we're creating space where everyone can actually speak in those spaces again, because we don't what it's like to be silenced. And I think that's from all facets, no matter if it's about, you know, being transgender, gender nonconforming, your gender identity, where you come from, your race, your age, etc. We know what it's like to not be able to speak our minds. So just allow that space in all places. And thank you all again. And, you know, make sure y'all get that done always.
And then I have one more question. I know I said I didn't have any more, but I always have one more. Can you guys pop in your favorite resource into the chat for us? Just pick one thing and put it in the chat. I think that just for future learning, I don't know, that's very off the cusp. So not to make you put you on the spot. It's not a test, but it kind of is a test. So we won't grade you, but and then thank you. There's going to be, for the participants, there will be an email that'll come out for feedback. We would appreciate if you would respond to that. That means a lot for Central Exchange. And then again, just thank you for hosting this. And Mona, Madison, thank you. I know that we're like repeating thank you over and over again, but this is such a good space to have everybody take the time out of their busy days to join us. It makes me feel happy. You've filled my cup today, at least. I don't know if anybody else, but.
So on behalf of Central Exchange and on behalf of the many, many, many messages I'm receiving in the chat, sincere gratitude and thanks to Cece and Tori and Stephanie for showing up, for educating, for your passion, for your patience. Some of those are my words. Some of those are our participants or our attendees' words. I'm so glad that you're all three open to continuing the conversation. And if you're attendee there, they have freely provided their contact information. So I think continuing the conversation is going to be a big part of this. We do invite you, like Katie said, to check out the Central Exchange calendar for the next 3 months, the second Tuesday from 11:30 to 1. Katie will be facilitating similar panels, all in the transgender, non-binary world. And we invite you to participate. We invite you to show up and keep those questions coming. Anne and Madison and I are thrilled beyond means to have the opportunity. We're very, very, very honored that Central Exchange was chosen to host this panel. So we thank you all for showing up today. Please send us any questions. And like Katie said, be on the lookout for an email from Madison later on today that will have a link to this recording. We invite you to share this recording if you feel it will be useful to friends, family, and other associates. It was an open invitation to the community. So again, on behalf of Central Exchange, thank you so very much. And let's all go make a little bit of a difference today. Bye all.